Said from Bay State, who said that with any indigenous nation and or community, people very greatly and what they know. They are not only difference between ordinary folk and expert, such as experiences, knowledge, keeper, healer, hunter, or ceremonies. There are also major differences of experiences and professional opinion among the knowledge holder and workers. As we should expect of any living dynamic among the knowledge holder and worker. Indigenous knowledge offer an important resource of for educating all students and improving relationship within the across communities. Framing these ideas as giving logic, we argue that if educator and policymaker are open, they can learn and great deal from indigenous knowledge and transforming education. Some indigenous knowledge in transforming education can be a common knowledge shared by all members of context of ethnic group. Many of these are learned through information are processed by local wisdom. Believe that this international webinar will be the sources of innovative ideas, concept, and breakthrough in the development of education for local content, which provide the concentrated situation and of communities and relations with the local environment and context in provide practical solution in education. At least, I especially thanks the organizing communities for their hard work, perseverance, and patiently preparing and organizing this international webinar so that I can go well, smoothly, and successfully. Finally, throughout this international webinar, let us extend our new insight in education to build better education in Indonesian. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wardiono, for the welcoming and opening speech. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the main session, let's start this event by praying first. So, the event that will be held today will run well without any obstacle at all. Pray based on individual belief begins. Pray ends. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to go to the main session, that is presentation by our amazing speakers that will be moderated by Mr. Ricky. But before, let us present the CV of our moderator today. So, as what we can see on the screen, Mr. Ricky Setiawan was born on Medan, North Sumatra at December 16, 1987. He graduated from Open University, Bachelor of Education in Primary Education at 2008. Then he continued his master's degree in National Donghua University, Taiwan, and graduated in 2019. He worked as a teacher in the University of Science and Technology, Taiwan from 2019 till 2021. And now he is a lecturer in our beloved university, State University of Surabaya, and of course, with amazing experiences and achievement. So, without waiting any longer for our amazing moderator, Mr. Ricky Setiawan, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for your introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to our international webinar. And today we will have three great sessions. So we'll have three great sessions. So the first session, the keynote speaker is Ms. Nell Taylor, an anthropologist from Australia, and the second will be Mr. Dhoni John Panisales, PhD from the Philippines. I call him usually as Brother DJ, and the last will be Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak, PhD. From State University of Medan. Okay, so without waiting for any longer, ladies and gentlemen, so please join this international webinar until the ends, and the link for the presentation will be shared at the end of this webinar. So let's go to the first session with Ms. Nell Taylor. And before that, I would like to introduce to all of you our first keynote speakers. Would you like to share screen the CV of our first keynote speaker? Okay, so our first keynote speaker is Ms. Nell Taylor, an anthropologist, communities manager from Terra Rosa Consulting from December 2016 until now. So Ms. Taylor has extensive experience working trainer and assessor and has developed and delivered course material for heritage and environmental training in the vocational education sector. And we can see that the qualification of Ms. Taylor here is Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and then Bachelor of Social Science and for sure, there are a lot of certificates in training and assessment, also in Aboriginal sites work. And the key skills here is native title ethnographic research, ethnographic research heritage surveys and consultations, vocational training and sensing, document production, digital engagement, and community consultation. And we can see a lot of project experiences here. Starting from 2016 until now. Okay, so without waiting for any longer, let's welcome the first keynote speaker, Ms. Nell Taylor. Hi, Ms. Nell, are you there? Ms. Taylor? How could I call you? Could I call you Nell?
Yes, that's fine. You can call me Nell.
Okay, Nell. Hi, I'm Ricky. So thank you very much for being our keynote speaker.
Recording stopped.
In today's international webinar. So, by the way, what time is it now in Australia?
It's 9:41 in Perth, Western Australia.
So it's because it's 8:41 a.m. Now in Surabaya. Okay, without waiting for any longer, ladies and gentlemen, this is our first keynote speaker, Ms. Nell Taylor. So Nell, time is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me just figure out how to share my PowerPoint. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint very clearly.
I'd like to welcome you to my talk about working in Aboriginal Australia.
Recording in progress.
And how it ties into Indigenous knowledge systems and transformative practice projects, cultural mapping, Aboriginal ranger training, and community arts programs. As part of this, we'll look at an Aboriginal dreaming story, the Seven Sisters Australian continent, and look at how painting the story can promote intergenerational teaching and learning. So today's objectives are to look at these activities as tools or strategies to promote the passing down of Aboriginal cultural knowledge in ways which are accessible and grounded in Indigenous ways of understanding, and to explore how cultural mapping, ranger programs, and community arts can be integrated into education more broadly. So feel free to ask questions at the end and have a think as we go through about how some of these activities could be integrated into your professional practice. So I've already had been introduced in great detail, but over the last 10 years, I've worked at Terra Rosa, and I've worked with over 15 different Aboriginal language groups in Western Australia. I also have a background in education. So I've taught English in Italy, Mozambique, and Australia. And I've also been recently involved in designing curricula for the Cert 3 in Aboriginal Sites Work, which is a qualification that we now offer at Terra Rosa. I should make it clear before going on that I'm not Aboriginal. And as a non-Indigenous person, there's an inherent issue with representing or speaking on behalf of Aboriginal people. It would have been great to have some Aboriginal people here to co-present with me today, but that wasn't possible. So I want to make it clear that I am not here today to speak for Australia's First Peoples. Rather, I'm going to report on my professional experiences working in community development and in partnership with different Aboriginal groups. And in doing so, I'm reflecting on my experiences and on the knowledge I've gained through this work. I should include that I will also be covering some of the knowledge that I've learned, which are the key methods that anthropologists use. So Terra Rosa, what do? We do a variety of different work, but the business largely exists because in Australia, mining companies, utility, and other services who are planning to use land are required to consult with traditional owners of that land prior to commencing their projects, and we help with that process. So one of the main things we do is heritage surveys. This is where anthropologists like myself go out with an archaeologist and traditional owner group involving cultural material, such as the blade that you can see in the picture here, or the engravings that you can also see here. It's always very exciting to find rock art sites because it provides an insight into what past people were thinking about, what they were communicating. You can see some curved shapes that look a little bit like bananas. They are boomerangs, which are hunting tools. And these things which look like handprints are not just an engraving, but a story about hunting and which animals they were hunting and how they were hunting. we find some of these sites which haven't been thousands of years and record them through GPS, through photography, taking scientific measurements, and through speaking with traditional owners whose ancestors created. And we submit all of this recording to government, ideally for protection. A company who wants to use that land may then be able to avoid that place in an ideal scenario. As well as archaeological sites, there are also what we call ethnographic sites. So anthropologists typically work with elders and knowledge holders to record the intangible cultural heritage. These are the named places, the histories, stories, and songs. Not something you can pick up and hold like an artifact or a blade or you can't see it like an engraving, but knowledge, places with names are often water sources, hills, birthplaces, burial sites, those type of places. I'm currently in the position as communities manager at Terra Rosa, and this means my task is to deliver community development projects which are aligned with some of the outcomes set by the community. This is part of Terra Rosa's aim to give back to some of the communities we work with. And this is included in the past community arts programs, protecting Aboriginal heritage sites, cultural mapping programs, and Aboriginal ranger programs, which we'll discuss in a bit more detail today. One key theme with all of this is the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge frameworks, community-led design, and high degrees of collaboration between the facilitators, consultants such as myself, and the community groups. So a little bit of background for you all. Amount of diversity within Australia's Aboriginal groups. Now, you may have thought of Australia as one country with one government, but actually Australia can be seen as 250 different countries. Each one of these colourful spots on the map represents with over 800 dialects. Each language is specific to a country or a piece of land and to a cultural group. Of these 250 distinct language groups, only 150 languages are spoken today. And of these, only 13 are spoken by the children. That obviously represents a huge issue of language loss, because language is identity. It's how we define our surroundings and our values. It's how we connect to our ancestors. And language connects Aboriginal people to their tribal law and culture. So there's a major issue in Aboriginal Australia with language and its sites and its embedded meaning. So this is a key issue which across the board, elders and community members are trying to reverse through some of the programs that I'll talk about today. Where are we working? We're in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. So that's the northwest of Western Australia. This area is both resource rich and culturally rich. It's an arid landscape. So temperatures reach over 40 degrees centigrade during exists in pools throughout the landscape. There's big rivers through the country, like this one here, but they'll only run after a big rainstorm. For the most of the time, the rivers look dry, but the water continues to exist underneath the ground. Aboriginal people, this is a timeless and spiritual landscape. So within a group's country, there are sites of great significance, hills, water sources, and landscape features, which have names, songs, and are intricately connected to what Aboriginal people call dreaming. Now, this is a very old landscape, and archaeological records confirm that this arid landscape, with its lack of water, has actually sustained human populations for the last 60,000 years. This means that Aboriginal people are known to be the world's oldest living culture. So this is another slide of the Pilbara region. And the Pilbara region has more than 31 Aboriginal cultural groups, often called language groups. Each culture has a traditional area where they used to travel through the land, practicing a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, moving between areas based on availability of food and, most importantly, water. Groups would meet up at the boundaries of their country for ceremony, marriages, and other trading business. These traditional homelands are referred to as a group's country. It's where people feel like they belong and they feel an unbroken connection to the spirituality of the land and the past ancestors who've walked that country. And if you have a look here, the places where I'm going to be talking about today are near Marble Bar. There is a spot on the map that says Marble Bar, and there's a spot on the map which says Nullagine. And in Nullagine, the Bulgu people are the traditional owners. And further into the purple, you have the Wadi Western Desert and the Wanman people. Now, they also live now in Nullagine for reasons I'll discuss soon. But it's a case of working with different cultural groups and trying to bring people back to their traditional country. So has anyone ever heard of the Dreaming? This is a European name, and Aboriginal groups have their own word for this, but it usually means a time when the world was soft and great ancestors were travelling through country, shaping the land and putting the law and the language into the land. So this is a belief that Aboriginal groups hold, and a common story is of a great creation serpent moving through the country, creating rivers and valleys. And these journeys are sometimes started on the land, but ended up now shown as constellations. When Aboriginal people go to country, they feel the presence of these spiritual beings, and these creation spirits have power today for affecting the lives and well-being of Aboriginal people. This respect often lies in looking after country, looking after plants and animals. So in a sense, the dream time is like a religion, and it remains the source and power behind Aboriginal culture. So you could compare it to the Quran, you could compare it to the Bible, or the doctrines of law or standards of ethics. It sets the rules on how people relate to each other, to plants and animals, and standards of behaviour. However, it's not written down, and it exists in no document, because Aboriginal culture is an oral culture, and these lessons must be communicated through storytelling, painting, and other art forms such as dancing and singing. This is also the Pilbara today. Iron ore is mined in large open-cut mines, and a fly-in, fly-out workforce travels up to this remote area to work in these mines. Aboriginal culture has to coexist in the context of mining and development to their traditional country. And there are other challenges faced by Aboriginal Australians today. So Australia is a very rich country. However, in the 200 years since colonisation, there has been great disparity between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians. Colonisation brought many challenges, such as forced relocation from traditional country, pastoral industry, mining, settlements, the stolen generation, where children were removed from their parents and placed in institutions, state policies of assimilation, the forced learning of English, and the denial of traditional language, separation of families, and the disruption of traditional practice, to name some of the main factors. Today, this has led to many inequalities, which are still being dealt with and still lived with. And many members of Aboriginal population also live in very remote areas of Australia, which comes with the additional challenges such as communications, access to health services, high cost of living. So where people once lived within those traditional boundaries of country that I was telling you about, they now live in regional towns with limited access to country. So despite these challenges, it's important to make the point that these cultures have survived and they've shown great resilience in the face of colonisation. Culture, traditional knowledge and practices are still strong. Traditional law and ceremony is practiced over much of Australia still. So my challenge as an anthropologist has been, how do we work with community leaders to preserve culture, to promote intergenerational teaching and learning, to protect sites of significance? I spoke before about language and cultural loss, which is occurring at a staggering rate in Australia. It's critically important that this knowledge is passed down to the present day generations. This type of knowledge is so intricately tied with land and spirituality that it's best taught outside of the classroom in a scenario where we can take elders and young people back to country together. Mapping offers a way to do this. So during cultural mapping, we collaborate with Aboriginal communities to organise programs which see a team of elders, younger traditional owners, anthropologists and archaeologists travel through a group's country with the aim of documenting and recording places and facilitating the knowledge transfer between elders and younger generations. This process leads to the sharing of important cultural knowledge, which may be documented by videography crews, defined on a map, or painted in traditional styles. So this is a cultural mapping project we're currently doing with the Balgu traditional owners. This project is concentrated on documenting the Balgu people's water places throughout their traditional country. It's involved teams travelling through the country to known water places, assessing the health of these places through scientific water testing, collecting stories and histories of the area, and putting all this information into a book which can be used as a resource for future generations. We also do Aboriginal ranger programs. So these are programs which see traditional owners employed on their traditional country to care for it by preserving the plants and animals, sacred sites, taking elders out to learn their stories, cleaning out water holes, graffiti removal, regenerating the country through cultural burning and many other activities. So during this work, the rangers collaborate with technical specialists such as environmental scientists, anthropologists, graffiti removal specialists who train them in Western scientific models of land management, whilst the elders are still there and are present to share their traditional knowledge of caring for country. In this way, it becomes a two-way learning environment. And here's some pictures of our bush classroom, which we set up. So everybody is here sitting down learning about the plants and animals on country. In the photo below, the team are cleaning out a water hole and getting rid of an infestation of typha weed in that water hole. And in the photo on the far right, one of our consultants is working with a senior elder who's sharing information about country. We are so privileged to work with these senior people. This man in the photo is the oldest Aboriginal person in the whole of Australia. He's over 100 years old, and he has such a rich amount of knowledge and information to share with everyone. And one of the things we're doing with this program is developing local guidebooks in Aboriginal languages, collaborating with linguistic centres to do this. So the rangers can also get a qualification out of this work. And part of my work has been helping the rangers attain the Cert 3 in Aboriginal Sites work and the Cert 3 in Conservation and Land Management. Now, both these qualifications use a co-assessment model with qualified trainers working in partnership with community elders to assess the qualification. Another model of intergenerational learning about Indigenous knowledge has been the community arts model. There's an Aboriginal community called the Erangaji people. And in this community, the elders are accomplished artists. And they decided they wanted to pass down cultural knowledge through the medium of painting. Now, these elders hold a great amount of knowledge about heritage sites, song lines, ethnobotanical knowledge. So this started an 8-year community arts program where every year the women come together to paint cultural knowledge. One of these projects, the women decided to document or map the story of the Seven Sisters. Now, I've got a video to show you, which will hopefully work on this program, but I'll just tell you a little bit about the Seven Sisters before we begin. So the Seven Sisters story, it's what we call a songline or a dreaming track. It's sung in traditional culture during ceremony time. And what is sung is a story that moves through the landscape. It spans almost half of the Australian continent, and it's tied to the Pleiades constellation in the night sky. And increasingly, it's featured in stories around the world. Interestingly, it's featured in stories around the world, many of which are about a group of women. So the song and story starts near the northwest coast of Western Australia and travels through the Pilbara region, through Nullagine, and onto more remote parts of the Western Desert. And in doing so, it passes through many different Aboriginal language groups, each who hold their part of the song and the story. There are many verses of the story, but the key parts are about a group of sisters being chased through the landscape by a lustful man who wanted to take one of the women as his wife. But he was the wrong skin group, and so the marriage would have been illegitimate. The sisters flew through the country, stopping at places and shaping the land as they went, and trying to hide from the man. The sisters continued to run until they fly into the night sky and become the Seven Sisters constellation that rises in the early morning and tracks across the sky, still chased by a solitary star, which is the lustful man. As a values tool, I believe it teaches the principles of law, skin groups, and women's collective strength and notions of sisterhood about supporting each other. So I'll see if I can play this video now about the project. Please let me know if you can't hear it. Okay, the sound doesn't seem to be working, but that's okay. We can still get the understanding of how they're painting this story. So one of the things she's saying is that all of the dots represent all of the wildflowers in the country. And in the center of the painting, you have the camp of the Seven Sisters. And then all the animal tracks around the outside are the animals which they were hunting as they travel through the landscape. And the footprints represent their travels through the landscape. And the blue are the pools that they were visiting along the way as they traveled. And they're hunting with their dingo, their dog, and that's why there's dog footprints. And this is all connected to their dream time culture, big dreaming. And they involved the senior elders who were teaching the story while the younger women were listening to the story and painting under instruction. And that's the photo of the finished artwork and all the community members who were involved with putting it together. These two older ladies here are the senior elders who wanted to share their story with the younger women through this program. And then they taught the younger women the dance for the painting, which is a dance. And this is what the community looks like, Nullagine. Very remote area. Stop. Okay, I've also included here some more photos of how the process unfolded with the younger women collaborating with the older women to paint the story. And there's the whole community sitting together in front of the artwork. So this really was a very successful way in passing down some of those stories associated with that songline to the younger generation. And the community loved this first program so much that they wanted to do it every year with a different story involved. So the next year, we did this painting with the community, and this one was the story of the Jila Gujara, which is two snake dreaming. This one is from Kalamili, where those two old ladies were from. Now, those two old ladies, they grew up in a traditional lifestyle, living on country, and they only walked in to towns and settlements in the 1970s. So they are an amazing resource of traditional cultural information and Indigenous knowledge. So this painting here was another one of those big dreaming stories that I'm telling you about of where their homelands are. Then there was this painting, which was the skin groups. Now, skin groups I've mentioned before, but skin groups are about who you can marry. And at birth, you're given a skin group based on what your mother's skin group is. And certain skin groups can only marry certain skin groups. So the community wanted to teach the younger children about this cultural rule. And this painting shows the 4 different skin groups and the lines of right-way marriage between the different skin groups. And also it includes the totemic animals of those different groups. Then another year, the community painted the Miniburu, which is again the 7 sisters, and had the 7 sisters another part of the story of them coming together and hiding from the man. This artwork was put in a gallery. It was actually exhibited down in Perth. So we brought all the artworks down and put them in a big gallery that told all these stories And this one was sold to a school, actually, and it's going to be used as a teaching and learning resource for a school. Then last year, the community decided to paint the story and the song of the Nullagine River, which is their local river, and how it flows through the landscape. And then just this year, I've just come back from a trip with this community. I've mentioned how those elders are from a place far into the desert, and they walked from the desert out into the community in the 70s. They have been asking us to go home to their community for a very long time, and we were able to find some grant funds to take them home. So in September 22, we took a trip to Carlamilli. We needed to hire a helicopter to take the elders out there. And so we flew over the country back to their traditional country. We had a film crew who recorded their stories, and we travelled to places they remember being at as young women. And a film will be made about this trip, which the community can have to preserve that cultural knowledge when these people are gone. And then when they came back into community, they decided to paint one of the old ladies' birthplaces, which we found on that helicopter trip. And so the community came together as before, all the women and the younger women working with the older women, and painted Lily's birthplace, which is very special. And so this is the final painting in the series through over the different years we've done this project. So I think taking this back to an education context, when we think about incorporating Indigenous knowledge into education, we need to think about some of the barriers to the transference of cultural knowledge, and we need to aim to address those barriers before work can be done. So whilst passing down cultural knowledge is extremely important for the elders and a critical part of what they want to see happen, there are so many barriers to doing that in a contemporary context. So people living away from traditional country, when Aboriginal people weren't able to remain on their traditional countries, they moved into regional towns, and it's often hard to afford the fuel and the car to get back out to traditional country. Busy daily lives, people have school and work to go to now. Another issue is that Aboriginal knowledge is not open source. It's not something that everybody has the privilege to have access to. It's stratified in who can learn what, and there are parts of the knowledge which is highly secret and would never be shared with younger generations until they'd reached a point where they'd gained the respect to be taught that information. So it's held amongst the vast array of cultural knowledge is actually held by a few older people and taught to younger generations when it's been. It's not in any book. Schools don't teach it. And if they were going to try, which culture would they teach? Would they teach their local country, or would they try and teach a more general culture? It's also, what we need is contextualized, experiential and relevant learning. And we also need imagined landscapes, because if you can imagine this knowledge is so tied to land and sites that to take it out of context and teach it in a classroom, it just doesn't have the same effect. It is best taught when you're on the land at those places. So what we are really missing is appropriate teaching and learning tools. And it should be mentioned here that there are actually great synergies between transformative education and Indigenous pedagogy. So both celebrate collaborative design, both are very highly exploratory, experiential, holistic in theory and practice, creative, place-based, and focus on the principles of sustainability. So there's actually a huge opportunity to align these two things when designing curricula. So the key question, how to transform education? How to transform education through Indigenous knowledge. I've showed you some examples of community-led education models for teaching and learning Aboriginal culture. These strategies have been chosen by specific Aboriginal communities as ways which align with their preferred ways of learning, their knowledge systems, and their values. The challenge is twofold. How do we continue to engage Aboriginal students in Australian classrooms in culturally appropriate ways of learning language, culture, and traditional knowledge? And how do we integrate some of these methods into mainstream classrooms through the Australian national curriculum so that all children, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, can benefit from learning about Aboriginal Australia? So some work is being done on this by Australian universities. The University of Melbourne has the Indigenous Knowledge Institute, where curricula is being developed which teachers can use as a resource. But what is needed, in my opinion, are more resources designed by Aboriginal elders and scholars, and much more face-to-face elder engagement in classrooms. So thank you for listening today. And if you have any ideas or questions, I think we have time now to discuss questions. And thank you for listening to my talk today.
Okay, thank you very much, Nell, for your presentation. It's such a great presentation. And while we are waiting for the questions from our participants, I would like to resume all the presentations. And it's very interesting presentation that it shows the richness and the variety of the ethnic groups and languages in Australia, which is the same as in Indonesia. I mean, as we know, in Indonesia, we have thousands of ethnic groups and also hundreds of languages also. And I see that our participant is also interested in the cloth painting, which is we call it same as Indonesia. We call it batik, the same like what I'm wearing right now.
Sarah, dan Sylvie.
Okay, so it's the same pattern. Yeah, show that we have some similarities in some perspective. Okay, so I see that we have the first question here. Can the host show me the chat box, please? The unmute. Here is the first question. So to Nell, does Indigenous knowledge need a relation of cross-culture and the local ones? So it's from Mahir Jombang. Okay.
I think it does because, well, it depends who the It depends who the learner is. If the learner is an Aboriginal person, then the ideal way for them to learn about cultural knowledge is through their elders, and it doesn't need any cross-cultural input. However, if the learner is a non-Aboriginal Australian person, then there will always be a cross-cultural element, because we will need to adapt the Indigenous knowledge frameworks for a mainstream classroom. And so, yes, I do think that learning Indigenous knowledges requires a cross-cultural approach in that context. And I think the best cross-cultural approach you can use is to bring an elder into the classroom and have them share their stories and represent their culture, rather than a teacher trying to represent it when it's not their culture. Does that answer the question?
Okay, thank you, Nell. Yeah, I think, yes, that answers the question from here in Jombang. Okay, by the way, do we have any other questions? Okay, we have Hussein from Surabaya here. So what obstacles stand between Indigenous kids and higher education? So how to handle that kind of obstacles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I talked about some of the challenges faced by Aboriginal Australians in the years since colonisation, and the realities of living in a post-colonial Australia. I think there are a number of challenges faced by Aboriginal people in terms of higher education. And one of those is that typically mainstream classrooms have not incorporated Aboriginal ways of learning. And so typically, we still have classrooms which teach in a Eurocentric model. So, it doesn't, I'll give you a very practical example. One of the cultural taboos in Indigenous culture, in Aboriginal cultures, is singling one person out and asking them a question, and eye contact, because eye contact is often seen as disrespectful, whereas in European culture, eye contact is a sign of respect. And so in a classroom environment, if you have a young Aboriginal child, the teacher looks them directly in the eye and asks them a question, singling them out, they feel disrespected and they feel shamed for being singled out, whereas a non-Aboriginal person would not face that issue. And so there's a lot of examples like that where classrooms they need to become more culturally aware, and they need to adapt to Aboriginal ways of learning, because at the moment there is statistically there is an issue when it comes to Aboriginal engagement in classrooms. We have much lower rates of literacy, much lower rates of school attendance, much lower rates of engagement in the higher years of education amongst Aboriginal students. And so that does really need to be addressed, and those barriers need to be fixed. But I think it all comes back to making the classroom a safe, culturally appropriate and culturally sensitive place to be.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer, Nell. And we saw here that Ms. Neni Mariana, one friend of yours also that you know her, is raising hand. Bu Neni, do you want to ask something perhaps?
Yeah. Thank you, Patty. Hi, Nell. Hi, thank you for being here and giving us such a very great presentation and show us how beautiful the Aboriginal arts is. And here I was just wondering, because I know your background and then a little bit, and then as a Western people, then what did trigger you at the beginning so that you have a very high passion to know about the Aboriginal Indigenous knowledge?
Well, I studied anthropology, and anthropology, for those who don't know, is the study of cultures. And so I think I developed my interest in Aboriginal Australia after working in Aboriginal Australia, learning all the things that I had never learned in the classroom, because when I went to school, a lot of these things which I talked about today were not talked about and were not taught to non-Aboriginal children. And so it really opened my eyes when I went on a few of these jobs and met these elders and learned about this rich landscape, rich cultural heritage. I thought, wow, like I never knew any of that. And I am Australian. And I'm from quite a privileged background in terms of having two parents who are educators, and I didn't know this. So I think there is a huge gap in knowledge in Australia between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australia, and there's a lot of misunderstandings, and really we have an obligation to learn about our First People when we are Australian. So that's why I developed my interest.
Yeah, you are a great example of how we can do like cross-cultural understanding. And then that's nice, Nell. Have a good job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bunini, and thank you, Neil. And yeah, we see here there's one raising hand and there's another question. So we go to to Mr. Budi Halomoan Siregar first, who already raised hands. Mr. Budi, good morning. Would you like to ask questions perhaps
Yes.
to Neil?
Thank you, Bang Ricky. Okay. Thank you, Bang Ricky. Thank you, Nell. Introduce me. I am Budi. I'm a student in PhD program in University of Medan. If talking about the integration between local wisdom or indigenous knowledge and education is a very interesting topic to discuss, according to me, right? So now, according to you, what are the principles that need to be considered to integrate indigenous local knowledge in mathematical learning? For example, on the topic of geometric transformation. I mean, what the principle that we have to consider to design a learning if we want to integrate between the indigenous knowledge and mathematical learning, especially for topic of geometric transformation? Thank you.
Wow, that's a hard question. I'm not a mathematician. Maths is not my strong point. I do think there are many things which we can integrate into math from Indigenous knowledge systems. One of which, let me think about this. Well, one of which could be about the stars and star stories and how people calculated moving through the country and distances by using the stars. So that is something that Aboriginal people used to do. And I think that would be very interesting to integrate into a mathematics curriculum. Also, yeah, geometry in terms of dot painting and how colours are organised and patterns in terms of these traditional artworks would be interesting. Also, song cycles. And so song cycles are traditional songs which are sung in ceremony. Now, this would be hard to access this sort of knowledge because it's quite protected in terms of its sacredness. But songs are sung which have certain scales, certain mathematical scales in their formation. And you could use a song to analyze the scale that song uses and the rhythms and how the music is formed. So just some ideas there. But I know that other people are doing some really interesting integrations of mathematics and Indigenous knowledge systems around the world. And yeah, there are lots of good examples online as well of different crossovers in that space.
Okay, thank you, Nell.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Budi, for your questions, and thank you, Nell, for the answer. And we have the last questions here, perhaps from Anna. Okay, so from Anna Let, and perhaps this will be our last questions for this first session. So what should a teacher do in implementing education through local wisdom if the teacher himself or herself still has minimal knowledge about the local wisdom that will be brought into the learning?
Yeah, this is a really good question because I think this is the key issue facing integrating Indigenous knowledge into Australian classrooms. Teachers feel ill-equipped to deal with the topic, and they feel like they are not the right people to speak for the culture, especially if they're not non-Aboriginal. So I think my main point would be that we just need to try as hard as we can to integrate Aboriginal and Indigenous voices into the classroom so that these cultures are able to speak about their own culture to students. So I said at the beginning, there's an issue with me representing Aboriginal people and Aboriginal culture, and I don't wish to do that. And that is always going to be an issue. And I think that if you really want a genuine co-design and genuine collaboration with Indigenous people worldwide, they need to be engaged in the classroom to talk about their own culture. In saying that, if that is not possible, the next best thing is having some really good resources to use, which have been designed by and approved by cultural authorities on that subject. And that would be the Aboriginal people of that cultural group who've designed these, maybe in with a partnership with the university or something like that, which can be used by all teachers with minimal they can have minimal background understanding, and they can just use the resources which have been approved for use. And I think if you're doing those two things, you're well on the way to addressing that issue. And then I think the teachers need to feel inspired to go and do their own research as well and read up on the culture which they are aiming to represent in the classroom. And, you know, there's no, it needs to be a cross-cultural process and an effort by all involved to try and integrate these things as best one can.
Okay, thank you very much, Nell, for the answers. So I think that's wrap up all our first session with you for sure as a very great keynote speakers. Thank you very much. And here we would like to honor you a certificate of appreciation. Yes, can the committee share screen? Okay, perhaps we will take like picture or screenshot of capture it. Okay, already done or not yet? One more time, please. Done. Okay, so thank you very much, Nell. And perhaps after this, we will also have a group session with all the participants in our first session. So are you ready? Okay, so we'll take the pictures, the photo group session in 3, 2, and smile, and 1. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Nell, and we wish that we can meet again. We can have you again as our beloved keynote speakers in the next event, in the next international webinar. Thank you and see you. Bye bye. Huh? The same. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that's all for our first session. Now we go to our second session with our second keynote speakers, Dhoni Panisales, Sodasta PhD. So I would like to introduce his CV first. Okay, so Dhoni Panisales Sodasta, PhD. I call him DJ. So from University of the Philippines, Visayas, an assistant professor of education at the Division of Professional Education, College of Arts and Sciences, University of the Philippines, Visayas. And we can see the education is PhD in education in National Tonghua University in Taiwan. We went to the same university for our postgraduate. That's how I know him for the last 5 years, perhaps. And I'm so happy to meet you again, DJ, today online. And we can see the research interest here in Indigenous people's education, critical multicultural education, social movements in relation to education and service learning. And his current collaborative project is with Artivism Ilo explores eco-justice education issues along the intersections of local knowledge and food suffrage sovereignty and your own engagement and art as activism within agricultural communities and indigenous ancestral domains. Okay, so we have the next 45 minutes of your presentation and another 15 minutes for the Q&A session. So DJ, I would like, the participants would like to listen to your presentation, but before that, the keynote speaker would like all of us to see a video, 3 minutes video. So after watching this video, I would like to give the time to yours, DJ. Okay, thank you very much, and let's enjoy the video and the presentation from our second keynote speakers.
Pahuway, pahuway, kinanglan man sang baybay. Pahuway, pahuway, aton nga hatagan, ang aton kadagatan. Sang tiyempo magbawi, paagi sa nagakaangay, nga pagpapahuway. Ang Visayan Sea, sangkad nga dagat sa Masbate, Iloilo, Negros, Capiz, Cebu, Bugana sa Mangat, Tuman ka mapuslanon, hinanglangit naton nga tatapon. Gani papahuway, pahuway, kinanglan man sang baybay. Pahuway, pahuway, ating nga hatagan, ang ating karagatan. Sang tiyempo magbawi, paagi sa nagakaangay, na pagpapahuway. Pahuwayan naton kadadlo season, pagdakop baligyasan, tamban bulaw bumaa, balantyong tuloy tabaga, kagahasa-hasa, agot sila magdamo, kaga magdalang ko. Kay may papahuway, pahuway, kinanglan man sang baybay. Pahuway, pahuway, ating nga hatagan, ang ating kadagatan. Sang tiyempo magbawi, paagi sa nagakaangay, na pagpapahuway. Sugod sa Nobyembre 15, tugtog 15 sa Pebrero, Visayan Sea aton pahuwayan, sa sulod sang 3 ka bulan. Halin sa Danau Escalante, pakadto sa isa sang bantayan, matabok sa parola sang higantes, kagdayon sa isa sang ulotayan. Ang Visayan Sea dayon palibutan, sang norte sa Capiz kag Amuman, sang baybayin sang Lilo na Sidlangan, kag sang norte sa Negros Island. Pagdakop, pagbaligya, pagbakal, pangisda nga komersyal kag municipal, tanan ini untatan na ane, ang good Visayan Sea makapahuway. Papahuway, pahuway, kinanglan man sang baybay. Pahuway, pahuway, aton nga hatagan, ang aton kadagatan. Sang tiyempo magbawi, paagi sa nagakaangay, nga pagpapahuway. Gani papahuway, pahuway, kinanglan man sang baybay. Pahuway, pahuway, aton nga hatagan, ang aton kadagatan. Sang tiyempo magbawi, paagi sa nagakaangay, nga pagpapahuway.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Brother Ricky, can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning, DJ.
Good morning, and I'm happy to
Can
see
hear
you. Yes, it's been almost a year since we've seen each other. I'd like to greet everyone as we say here, mabuhay, maayong aga sa inyong tanan. You can call me DJ, and of course, in Southeast Asia, we always value friendship. And when my friend, brother Ricky here, invited me to be here, I said I have to honor this friendship because he invited me, so I have to say yes to this invitation. And I would like to say good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be sharing on a topic that is very close to my heart as well. And thank you also to the State University of Surabaya for this opportunity. I hope my audio is clear, and I will be sharing my slide. Please allow me to share my slide. Okay, here we go. I hope you can see my slides. Yes, and now I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you some of the key insights that I would like to talk about regarding Indigenous education. My talk is about rethinking mainstream education's relationship with Indigenous knowledge and some challenges and possibilities. A lot of the examples I'm going to talk about will be coming from the Philippines, and because that is where I do my field work. The video that you've seen or that you've watched, actually, I'm sorry if there's no English translation, but actually the title of the video means Pahuway sang Baybay. It means rest for the sea. It is actually a campaign. It's now a policy in our area in the Philippines where we close off the fishing in certain parts of the sea to let the sea rest because the sea also has to rest. And this kind of resting is very much common to our approach as well into the other areas of our islands. Like, for example, here we have in agricultural lands in the Philippines, we have a practice that is very common in indigenous lands. It's called the fallow period. It is also the rest for the land. So you can see here, this is a piece of agricultural land near the fieldwork site that my colleagues and I used to work with. And here you can see that this land has not been touched for several months. And usually the practice is that after harvest, a lot of farmers would plant on that piece of land again. But for indigenous farmers, they would let the land rest. And I would like us to focus on this word that they use. The word is rest. Rest is something that is usually associated with human beings or animals. Usually it is animals and human beings who are resting. But here, the indigenous thinking is that land should rest, the sea should rest because they also feel tired. And we think of land as something that is alive. We think of the sea as something that is alive. So we think of the land and the sea as living creatures. And it is not actually very strange to do that because in many indigenous communities, not only here in the Philippines, but in many indigenous communities in Austronesia, especially. And when I say Austronesia, it's the region of lands that stretch from Taiwan to the Philippines, down to Indonesia, and down to the island groups in the Pacific. And in many of these islands, they think of nature as alive. They think of nature as not just a place. They think of nature, for example, as a woman, as a mother, as a living creature. So for them, nature is not just soil or land where we live. Nature is one large living creature that gets tired and also must rest. And here lies the wisdom of indigenous knowledge, where we think of the land not only as a sort of resource, but really as a creature that lives with us. So In the Philippines, we have a lot of indigenous groups, but I think not so much compared to Indonesia. In Indonesia, you have thousands of ethno-linguistic groups. In the Philippines, we have around 80 to 100 ethno-linguistic groups. I belong to one of them. And the more languages, the more language diversity there is, the more there is also a diversity of indigenous knowledge that is available for us. And here, even if we come from different indigenous groups here in the Philippines, we have shared certain knowledges that are common with us, especially our knowledge about nature. So just to give you a little background of where I am. So I do a lot of my field work in the Philippines, especially in the island region of Western Visayas. And in the island regions of Western Visayas, there is an island called Panay. Panay is known for its agricultural lands. In fact, the word Panay is from the local term here. It's aninipay, which is actually like a tall grass that grows near rivers. It is sometimes also used as a term for rice. So here in this island, there are indigenous groups living here, and one of the indigenous groups that I work with, I think for more than 8 years now, are the Tumandok or the Panay Bukidnons. The Tumandok is both noun and adjective. Of course, we know that noun is a name, but adjective is also like a description because it is also used as a description for people who are natives of the land. Currently, they have already different kinds of livelihoods right now. Some of them are hunter gatherers, some of them are slash and burn farmers, and most of them are actually settled farmers. Some of them would find work in the city or in the towns. They could be seasonal workers or paid employment. And of course, a lot of them are also doing what people ask buy and sell. They do entrepreneur. So they on regular days, they speak a language which is called Karaya, and that is their casual language, which is quite different from the language that they use during formal ceremonial events. And of course, there are only very few of them who can speak Ligbok. And the challenge for us is that the lesser people who are able to speak and understand the ancient language, the more that the knowledge that is within that language is also threatened, because when we forget the language, we also forget the memories and the knowledge within that language. So I've been working with this community. My friends and I and my colleagues have been working with this community for more than 7 or 8 years now, and we are interested on their practice called the School for Living tradition. So from Monday to Friday, their children, the indigenous children, attend public school where they learn Western curriculum. It is only during weekends where their community set up their own school where they learn their own culture, their Panay Bukidnon indigenous culture. And we tried to work with them and study what they are doing in their School for Living traditions. And it is through this experience and many other experiences related to indigenous culture and working with indigenous peoples that I get my presentation and the things that I'd like to share this afternoon. This morning. And so before I formally begin, I should like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of both the Philippines and Taiwan, where I did a lot of my academic and research work because they are the original guardians of the land. Now, for my presentation has three short parts. First, I'd like to discuss what are indigenous knowledge, where and why do we need indigenous knowledge in education, and the third is that what's the next after we have integrated indigenous knowledge into education? What is there to do next? So oftentimes a lot of the things that I've learned about indigenous knowledge is through immersion. So which means I have to live with the community and work with the community, and also importantly to also listen to the community. So there is an official definition of what indigenous knowledge is. And usually, indigenous knowledge is known as the knowledge that people in a given community had developed over time and continue to develop. And who owns and where can we find this indigenous knowledge? Indigenous knowledge is collectively owned by everyone. There's no exclusive authority to own indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge is owned by everyone in the community. So when it is used by the community, it is owned by the community. And usually we create these indigenous knowledge are created based on the experience on adapting to a local environment. So which means that if you are from an indigenous community on the mountains, your indigenous knowledge would also be different from the indigenous knowledge of indigenous people who live near the sea or who live in agricultural areas. It is a very place-based kind of knowledge, which means that this is the kind of knowledge that will be different basing on where the indigenous peoples live. And they have created this knowledge because they have passed down things that they have discovered from one generation to another to the younger generations, which means also that indigenous knowledge does not stay the same. The more that each generation uses the indigenous knowledge, the more it becomes a changing and more improving entity. So it is not static. Does not stay the same. It gets improved every generation. Now, there are different types of indigenous knowledge depending on which source you would consult. But for the purpose of our discussion this morning, especially for those who are interested in integrating indigenous knowledge into education, especially for our pre-service teachers, those who are going to be teaching maybe in elementary school or in high school or in early childhood education, there are a lot of indigenous knowledge out there. And it's important for us to know what are the types of indigenous knowledge that we can use for our own classrooms and for our own curriculum. So one of the examples of indigenous knowledge are information. So information is knowledge. So knowledge, for example, about what? So for example, we have knowledge about plants that we could use for medicines. There are also a lot of plants are all around, especially I think in Indonesia, that people use so that to repel the insects, because there's a lot of insects in our country. I live in the Philippines. I have traveled to Jawa Timur in 2018 for 1 month, and just like in the Philippines, we have a lot of insects. But people, both in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and many parts of Southeast Asia and beyond, we have used plants so that the insects will get away from us. There are also some plants that we could use and look at to find out if the soil has a lot of salt in it, because certain plants live in salty soil. There's also a lot of plants that our elders, our ancestors use to determine what season it is. So they just look at the plants, they just look at the different plants growing in the area, and they will already know what season it is. So a lot of these are examples of information that is still part of indigenous knowledge. Next, we have practices and technology. So examples of practices and technology are the things that we do. So the actions that we do as members of the culture, these are our practices and technology. So they include our healing practices, our farming practices, the practices that we do to preserve food, especially preserve meat or preserve our seeds. So these are our practices. We should also include fishing, because I understand that Surabaya is a coastal city. So a lot of people living around Surabaya have fishing as their main source of livelihood. And with the source of livelihood of fishing, especially around Surabaya, you have a lot of knowledge about fishing. We also should include house building, because in Southeast Asia, we build our houses differently based on our location and also based on our climate. Next, we have beliefs, and our beliefs are usually around certain beliefs like religion. And there are some religious practices that brings people together, like festivals and rituals. In our communities in Southeast Asia, weddings and funerals are examples of activities where we gather together, not only to do the rituals, but also to eat together. So for some anthropologists, these occasions like weddings and funerals are chances for us to eat together. And also one of the things that are part of our belief systems here in Southeast Asia are our regard for the sacred spaces. And this is very true in Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines, especially in my island, in the island of Panay, where we have used our regard for sacred spaces to help conserve nature. So for instance, we have a concept in the island of Panay called mariit. Mariit is an adjective that we use to describe a system of belief about certain places being inhabited by spirits or inhabited by entities that we could not see. So when a place is mariit, so the place is sacred. So this practice is can be traced back to the pre-colonial Philippine practice of animism, or the belief that everything possesses a soul. So for instance, in the indigenous knowledge, especially in my island, the tree has a spirit, the rocks have spirits, the mountains have spirits. So everything is alive for the indigenous point of view. So we have used this kind of idea to help us in nature conservation. One of the reasons why there are a lot of forested areas that remain in my island is that a lot of these forested areas are known to be mariit, meaning sacred, and therefore people will not go through these places. And because these places had been known to be sacred and mariit, and therefore off limits, they become the home of a lot of endangered species and a lot of endangered plants and animals. And this is how indigenous knowledge could actually, indigenous knowledge and indigenous belief help in nature conservation. So, for example, here we have trees that we consider as mariit, and therefore people don't cut down these trees. And because people don't cut down these trees provide a home for a lot of creatures, a lot of birds, a lot of insects, because people don't touch them, because people think it's mariit. People think that it is the home of spirits. And because of that, it helps nature conservation. And also, mariit becomes the term for associated for to be careful, meaning this place is prone to accidents. There is a story with mariit, because if you go to a place that is mariit, there is a big chance that you will get an accident, and therefore you have to be very careful and walk very slowly. So our policemen and our traffic enforcers in the city use this as a way to caution people against speeding or going very fast. So we have here a sign, just like here in this picture, like caution. It's mariit, meaning you have to be very careful. So another example or another type of indigenous knowledge that you could also look at are tools. These are the equipment that we use for hunting, for farming, for fishing, storage, and we use them a lot, again, depending on where we live. Next, we have materials. Materials are the things that we use for many things, like house building, making baskets, weaving, pottery, and other crafts. Next, we have human resources. Our human resources are the people in our community with indigenous skills, like our healers. I think in some parts of Indonesia, you have traditional healers like your tungkot bayi. I'm not sure. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. So there we have traditional women healers in the community. Just like here in the Philippines, we have those too. In Indonesia, in some communities, you have these kinds of healers as well. So and sometimes these healers are also midwives. So they also help women give birth. We also have metal workers. We have fisher folks. We have our wise elders to provide us good advice. And importantly, especially here in my island, storytellers and chanters are very important because they hold the memory of the community. They hold the stories of the community. In the indigenous group that I work with, chanters and storytellers are important because they hold the stories of the community that are very important to the community, like the epic chants. The Panay Bukidnons that I'm working with, they have a collection of chants that gets to be memorized by only a few members of the community. Next, experimentation. Experimentation are the things that we do in order to improve our daily practice. So, for instance, our healers, our shamans, our weavers, our craft workers, they become better at what they do by doing new practices or by incorporating new practices. So our healers, for example, experiment on a lot of plants for medicine. Our craft workers experiment with new ways of making metal crafts, and this is the way for them to test and develop their skills as well. Next, we have biological resources, and these are the resources like plants and animals that we need for our everyday life, like food, sometimes our shelter as well, and also our medicine. And next, we have education. For many indigenous groups, we who also go to school on regular days, but the way that they learn on a regular day when they are outside of school is through storytelling, through chanting, through singing, through dancing, and through a practice called apprenticeship, where a young indigenous uh, member of the community learns from an older indigenous member of the community. So if I am a young farmer, I learn from the old farmers about their practices. And also we learn a lot here in Southeast Asia, we learn a lot through observation. And this is something that is very common among many indigenous groups here in our part of Asia. And last, we have communication, sending messages. So we send messages by storytelling as well, by poetry, by songs, by dances, by chants, by also writing messages. In some indigenous groups in my island, they write the messages in wood, and that is they send these messages to another group of people. We also communicate through the use of drawings by weaving, and we have a practice in many Southeast Asian indigenous groups of tribal councils, where the elders of the community and the adults of the community come together to resolve and talk about very important community issues. And also we have different kinds of mediation practices. We could not avoid conflict in many groups, and therefore there is always a person or a group of persons who are tasked to become the mediator to settle conflicts so that everyone will live peacefully in the community. And this is part of mediation. Now, we might be wondering, why is it that we have been so interested with indigenous culture only now? Why, especially here in the Philippines, that we are not interested about this many years ago? Well, in the Philippines, we have what we call as our colonial legacy. For more than 300 years, we were under the Spaniards. And when the Spaniards came to the Philippines and they saw the natives of the islands, there was no Philippines before. There was just a mixture of different islands and different kingdoms here in our country before. There was no Philippines before. But when the Spaniards arrived, they brought in Christianity and they wanted to civilize the people. And so they kind of want to change the indigenous culture of the people. And so what happened was that uh, even there was a project, there was an ongoing project to change the natives from their own indigenous identity to an identity that looks like European. And that is a very long process. And even until now, many people and even natives in my island wanted to look more European, wanted to look more foreign than looking at like themselves. So that is something that is very common even until now, and that is part of the colonial influence in our country. And when the Spaniards left, the Americans came, and for the Americans to justify their rule over the islands of the Philippines, what they did was that they picked up different samples of indigenous groups, and they displayed these indigenous groups in the United States in the 1904 World's Fair. So as you can see here on the screen, we have this is the advertisement for that show where native indigenous peoples are shown in many cities in the United States for people to look at, including that little child there on the right hand side of the screen. So indigenous people were displayed to the audience, to the American audience, to convince the American audience that we should invade the Philippines because they are a backward people and they need us for them to become modernized and educated. And this is one of the reasons, one of the many reasons why we don't have so much respect for indigenous culture even today. And this also means through the process of education, through the process of a Western style education, that the knowledge being taught in our schools in the Philippines are more Western knowledge than our own knowledge. So this kind of approach is to turn the native indigenous people into something that is recognizable to foreigners who occupy and invade the country. So that is the reason perhaps why even now, if you go to school and you ask kids why they go to school, it's probably because they were given a certain story, a certain narrative. And what is this narrative? That if you finish school, you can leave the land, you can leave the country, and you can earn money in another country. Usually that's the story that is being taught in school. One of the reasons why children are in school right now, so that they can earn money. And that is actually quite problematic as well, because what will happen is that a lot of us do not give the same dignity anymore to some of the practices that we have. Like, for instance, the study from our Ministry of Agriculture, our Department of Agriculture, says that the average age of Filipino farmer is 57. If that's the case, who will feed the Filipino people in the next 10 years? Because modern education seems to take us away from the land and from our identity. No one wants to be farmers anymore. Everyone wants to be white-collared workers. And that is okay. But the problem is, what will happen to our land? What will happen to our livelihood when we have lesser farmers, but more and more people to feed? So here in the Philippines, one of the things that had been tagged as one of the causes of this is our educational system. Yes, indeed, the Philippines has a high rate of literacy in Southeast Asia, but also the problem is that in terms of reading comprehension, we are quite low. We scored the lowest among 79 participating countries in reading comprehension. And a lot of the students also drop out of school. 11% of those who enrolled in previous years would drop out of school. And more than half of those who drop out of school are females, are girls. And the thing is that a lot of these dropouts, actually, what the numbers don't tell you is that a lot of those who drop out are actually coming from indigenous learners. They are indigenous learners who drop out of school. And that is very alarming as well, because instead of being able to have education, they would drop out. And it lowers their chances of not only participating as workers, but also of their skills on how to survive the modern world. So the problem for the government and for many organizations here is how to encourage more indigenous learners to stay in school. Because right now, a lot of them are not in school because of this problem. So the Department of Education came up with an Indigenous Peoples Education Curriculum Framework. And what is this framework, and why did they come up with this framework? Well, this framework was inspired by the United Nations call for Indigenous Peoples Education. For the United Nations, there is the need or the right for the youth to be educated about their own culture as well as their own indigenous language. And eventually other scholars also supported this by saying that this kind of education should focus on teaching indigenous knowledge, models, methods, and content within the formal or non-formal education system. This means that there are different ways of having indigenous people's education. And in the Philippines, the government responded to this by creating formal education, non-formal education, and informal education that integrates the following: indigenous knowledge systems of the people, community history and languages. They have their indigenous learning systems, their community way of life, including their farming cycles, their life cycles, their fishing cycles. And also we have to also be sensitive to the educational goals, aspirations, and competencies of the different indigenous communities. And thus, it is important for education, for mainstream public education, to always talk with elders and other community members on the process of learning, on how to assess and how to manage this education system. Now, this started formally in 2013, and the rules on how this is going to be done started only in 2016. So we are quite late in the game here. So, what is this iPad program or Indigenous Peoples Education Program? The goal of this program is for us to come up with a basic education that is responsive to the context of the students, that respect their identities and promotes the values of their indigenous knowledge, their competencies, and other aspects of their cultural heritage. So this is a policy for curriculum and at the same time an approach to teaching and an approach to learning as well. And there are several objectives of the iPad program. This is from the iPad program of the government, of the Department of Education. I think in Indonesia, you call it Ministry of Education. So here we have the following objectives. We want this program wants to establish a rights-based partnership with IP. IP means indigenous peoples communities, so that they will be included, so that they will participate, and that they will be empowered to come up with programs, educational programs related to their everyday life. The second objective of the iPad program is to make a curriculum that is responsive to the culture of the indigenous people. Third is to build the capacity of teachers, because just like the points raised before, it is difficult to have indigenous education if the teachers themselves do not have the capacity to teach indigenous knowledge. Four, we have to develop culturally appropriate learning resources, so books, learning materials, all of these are part of all of this, because a lot of the materials that we have right now are still very much from the point of view of a learner who lives in the city, not from a learner who lives in indigenous community. And fifth, we have to strengthen a policy environment that is supportive of the indigenous people's education, because until right now, there's still a lot of schools and a lot of communities who do not understand why we have to have an indigenous people's education project. And six, we have to address the learning needs of indigenous learners who lack access to basic education services, especially when it comes to teaching and learning access. A lot of schools do not have the correct number of teachers, and they don't have a lot of resources. And it's a big issue here in the Philippines to have adequate resources given to all learners, regardless of whether they are living in urban areas or living in the indigenous people's areas. So before I continue, let me share a short video. Hopefully, watch the watch the video. I will okay. I will share this video. Hopefully, the okay. Please, would the host please inform me if you can or could not hear the sound of the video? Thank you. Can you hear the video? Could the host please tell me if you can hear the video?
Yes, DJ.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So I'll continue playing the video. Okay. So this is in the same island in the Philippines.
Halin sang pagbugtaw ko Nagabugtaw ako alas 5. Tama karayo ang ginapanaw ko. Halin sa balay, nagapanaw ako mga 2 ka oras. Kung magbaha, mabudlay, magtabo.
Our major problem is poverty. Most, if not all, of our students belong to families below poverty line. I can really relate to them because as a young boy, I have to help in the farm.
Sorry, DJ, the video is not played yet.
Principal of
Okay, the video is not playing?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. So let me check. Share, new share. Oh, okay, okay. Thank you.
Saya dihilang.
So,
Alas
is it playing now?
Tama karayo ang ginapanaw ko.
Yes, Fred, thank you.
Balay, nagapanaw ako.
Thank you.
Is it playing?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'll just play it, okay? And please tell me if it stops or it's not playing. Thank you.
Mga 2 ka oras. Kung magbaha, mabudlay, magtabo.
Our major problem is poverty. Most, if not all, of our students belong to families below poverty line. I can really relate to them because as a young boy, I have to help in the farm. My name is Jesus Insilada, principal of Kaningon National High School. As a poor child and as an indigenous student, I myself have experienced to be underestimated. I have felt inferior. That is why indigenous people, the poor and the underprivileged, are very special to me.
Nag-untat lang ako kay waay sinanay din kay gasto kay
Last school year, we had 50 students dropping out from school. One of the important solutions that we have is culture-based teaching. Morning. It is the method wherein we integrate every aspect of the culture and traditions as Panay Bukidnon.
It's not difficult.
This is a mathematics class introducing mathematical concept, which is arithmetic sequence using the Panubok designs. These are very familiar with the students, therefore, we can expect very active participation and engagement in the lessons. What is the constant number? 10.
Pero sa ako, nung sapos ko naintindihan ang pagpanubok ko relate sa math kay ang pagpanubok partinadaan sa among kultura. Every squared is divisible by 2.
Mas gusto ko takan ang math. At syempre ang nakasana ang mga paagi bala ni Sir Isilada nga pagtudlo ka math.
Ang sekreto ni Sir Jesus sa pagpabalik kang kabataan bisan marayo ang ginaistaranan da, ginarespeto kag gina-value gid ni Sir Jesus ang culture.
Okay, so I will stop now. Okay. New share. I have to go back to my screen. Okay. So this is an example of an initiative of Indigenous people's education. So here, the iPad or the Indigenous People's Education Program of the government is seen as one of the possible solutions to encourage more Indigenous learners to stay in school. And in order to do that, we have to come up with an educational system, with a system for teaching and learning that makes it engaging, relevant to the immediate lives of the learners. Because if the learners do not see any engagement or relevance about the things that they learn in school, and they do not find it in their own culture, it's difficult for them to be engaged in school. And so for the iPad program, we still have a lot of things to do because we still have to come up with community engagement and partnerships because the school is not enough. It is not enough for the school to do it alone. Number two, we have to come up with more curriculum contextualization. The curriculum in the Philippines is pretty much a Western curriculum. The challenge is how to translate that into something that Indigenous learners and their communities can appreciate. Next, we have continuous hiring and development of IPED teachers. Also, just like the main issue about how can teachers who are not Indigenous peoples themselves, how can they use Indigenous knowledge to teach their subjects or to teach their lessons? That is why we need to continue to hire teachers who do not only know about Indigenous knowledge, but also are using Indigenous knowledge themselves. And last, also one of the things that we have to do as well is to support what we call as the mother tongue multi-based multilingual program, or the MTB-MLE, where the early grades and especially the key subjects like mathematics and science are taught using the mother tongue of the learners. And also we have the project now we call the last mile schools that provide access to culturally responsive education to schools that are very far away in the community or in the island. Okay, so what should be the place therefore? This is me winding up. Moving forward, what should be the place of Indigenous knowledge in curriculum and teaching? Well, if you ask my opinion about it, and as someone who's doing research on it, and as someone who's working with the community with Indigenous on Indigenous knowledge, we need to go beyond just putting it inside our subject areas like maths or science, because right now there are just content for our lessons. In mathematics, for instance, one of the approaches for integrating into Indigenous knowledge in mathematics is called ethnomathematics. So it's like the mathematics of local culture, where you come up with, let's say, algebraic expressions or functions to explain certain patterns, like weaving patterns, just like in the things that I'm wearing, or this clothes like I'm wearing. You can express this mathematically, and that is just one. But there is a need to go beyond just integrating knowledge. The curriculum needs to reflect the community condition, because the curriculum was designed not for Indigenous people. Our curriculum in the Philippines was designed so that we can create workers out of our students for companies and other people who do business. And so, what is the path moving forward? Yes, the government has their own Indigenous people's education, but we should also empower Indigenous communities to come up with their own education curriculum and with their own curriculum. So diversity is the key. There should not only just be one framework for Indigenous education. What we want to push, especially with my friends and from the NGOs I'm working with, is that there should be a diversity of different models of how Indigenous people's education should teach Indigenous knowledge, especially that these should be designed by Indigenous peoples themselves and not just only from the Ministry of Education or the Department of Education. Focus is especially needed for a kind of education that is close to the land, or is having a close relationship with the land. And so, moving forward, we have to also reflect on our experience of being taught Western knowledge. So in school, I went to a very Western knowledge-based school where I was taught to learn Western knowledge so that I can be successful, I can be rich, I can get a job, I get paid a lot of money, I could own a lot of things and control the world. But if we look at Indigenous people's schools, especially in the communities where I work with, they want to use Indigenous knowledge not to control other people, but to live harmoniously in the world. So you, as an Indigenous person, you do not own the world. The world owns you. And it's a different way of looking at reality. And so there are different models that we could use as Indigenous knowledge of the land. We have so much of these different models coming from different countries with Indigenous peoples, and we can learn from them. We can learn how they have negotiated their rights to the land. We could learn how they make inquiries and reflect about their experiences. We could learn how they engage with different people in the land and outside the land. We could learn about the different culture and the different languages that they have. And in doing so, we answer very important questions, whether you are indigenous or not indigenous, but living in the land. Where are you, and what kind of knowledge is available in the land or in the area where we live? What are the connections that we could make? And what is our relationship with Mother Earth? Or in our case, with Inang Kalikasan. That's our Tagalog word for Mother Earth. And in doing so, we reconnect and create a deeper relationship with the land where we are. And that is a different kind of education. And I believe that is how, in one of the ways where indigenous knowledge can transform education by changing our relationship with the land and changing our relationship with the knowledge that we learn. And with that, I'd like to thank the State University of Surabaya, especially the Faculty of Education and the Department of Elementary Education for this opportunity. Maraming salamat kaninyong tanan. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Good day, everyone.
Sama-sama.
Okay, I think that's it. I can stop share now.
Very much for the great presentation. We learned a lot for sure from your presentation. So yes, both Philippines and Indonesia, I can say we have a lot of similarities. First of all, we are countries consist of a lot of islands. There are 13,000 islands in Indonesia. I believe there are like 7,000 to 8,000 islands in the Philippines. Islands in both countries for sure will lead to and languages for sure. Yeah, that's why indigenous knowledge is very important for both countries. So yes, after your great presentation, we will go to the Q&A session, and here I will get the first question actually is from our brother Benny Setiawan. So yeah, before that, maybe I will have the first question first before we go to this one. Thank you, Mika, for sharing. So, yeah. So, there's questions from Brother Benny Setiawan. So, perhaps you can say hello to him later. He's also attending this webinar right now. So, his questions are, there are two questions actually.
Okay.
First is, based on your presentation, especially that, you know, there's limitations in higher educations when we want to teach the students, is time limitations because it's already restricted in the curriculum. So that's the first questions from Mr. Benny. And the second is, according to Iconhead, that cross-bordering is the main problem to students, especially in higher educations, to study about science in the classroom, because the indigenous knowledge that they have is totally different with the science knowledge in the classroom. So is there maybe from you, your solution, maybe alternatives, recommendations, suggestion, how to build a bridge between these indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge in the classroom? So
Wow.
yeah, there are two questions from Brother Benny.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Benny. I hope to visit you again there in Surabaya, and thank you very much for this for this question. Now, this question, I guess, is something that many science education departments, not only in Indonesia or even in the Philippines, are concerned about, but it's also concern. It's also a concern for many science education departments all around the world. Where how can we integrate the time for students, our service teachers, to learn indigenous knowledge, because we need to spend more time with them. Now, there are different approaches to that. Of course, we would not ask them to live there for a long time within a semester. And what one of the approaches that other universities are doing is that they start the immersion in very short amounts of time, maybe just 1 or 2 days, starting in their first semester. So in their first semester, they go to the communities gradually. They don't spend a lot of time there, but over the course of the next semesters, they spend more time there. If you are interested, there is a paper about that by Deborah Tippins and Shirley Nichols and Vicente Handa. It was written, I think, from University of Georgia in Athens, where they talk about community immersion for science education undergraduates. And in that model, there is prior to a semester where they have to do an immersion to the community, there are already instances where they have already visited the community before. So they already did some pre-learning activities before they visit the community. It's also important for universities, just like State University of Surabaya, to always have a community partner. So if you have a community partner, you already have a group or a community where your students can come in and learn. And the same community becomes the host of the next batch of students coming in, perhaps every year or every 2 other years. So that could be a model. But for us to learn about this model or about the things that could work for in terms of policy, in terms of how we run the curriculum for science education, it is perhaps recommended to also ask other science education departments in Indonesia what they are doing and also learn from other models or other lessons. So again, it depends on the model that you use, and it also depends on the readiness of our communities to engage with the university, because not all communities are always willing to embrace people coming from the university. And the second question is a very science education question on how do we bridge the world of Western science and how do we bridge it with the world of indigenous knowledge where our students come from. If you ask Jehedi and Aikenhead, there are different roles for students, especially for teachers. And for teachers, what is recommended is that we become not only teachers, but we also become what we call as culture brokers. So as a culture broker, we should understand what the other framework offers versus what the other framework offers. And our work as culture broker is very detailed and very time consuming, but it actually entails us being negotiators between these two worlds. So as teacher educators, or as, let's say, you who is teaching students to become future teachers, what are the possible skill sets that you can model to them that demonstrates your understanding of the two different knowledge systems of the Western knowledge science and, of course, the indigenous science that is in our community. So there are different steps and there are different experiences with that. I'm sure you have already interviewed a lot of teachers about their strategies. Perhaps what's the next thing that we could do is put together a lot of the strategies of teachers who tried their best to become culture brokers. And what are the practices that worked and what are the practices that still need to be refined. And with that, we can come up with a growing material, an evolving material on how to become better culture brokers, not only to educate our pre-service teachers, but also to model our practice to other universities in Indonesia as well. I hope I answered your question, Brother Benny, but if you have more questions, you know how to reach me. You can just send me a DM later. But thank you so much for that question. I think resonates well with our topic this morning. Thank you very much. Back to you, Brother Ricky.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, DJ, for your answer. And we will have the second questions here by Ilham, perhaps. Yeah, Ms. Buika, thank you very much. So yeah, we have one question from Ilham Handika here. What is the real challenge for indigenous people in defending their own traditional life from globalization impact?
Oh, okay. Wow. Thank you, Ilham. It's a difficult question, but also a very good question. It depends on the condition of the indigenous people, because different indigenous peoples in the world face some common problems. And one of the common problems of indigenous peoples is that a lot of some governments and some private corporations want to push them out of their lands because their land contain a lot of resources. So, and also a lot of governments sometimes, or a lot of companies, they want to get the resources coming from the land of the indigenous people. And having the rights to their lands is one of the biggest challenge of indigenous peoples, because the indigenous people, their identity is based on their relationship with the land. If you take the indigenous people out of the land, their sense of identity and sense of self also gets threatened. So their place and their permanent place in the land, their rights to the land, is the main challenge to indigenous peoples. Currently, with the indigenous peoples I'm working with, having their rights to their land be challenged by other people is their main problem, because they want to defend their land. By defending their land, they defend their way of life. So, what is the challenge for us who are not indigenous or are not living in the indigenous lands is, how can we support indigenous communities in their fight to protect their rights to their lands that are being taken away from them? So that, I think that's the short answer. It's a really complicated it's a complicated and complex issue, and I do hope that in your place, at least there in Indonesia, there are already people who are already trying to talk about this and do something about this. And thank you very much for that very insightful question. And this is also, I think, a question that people from the universities also need to be engaged with. I guess that's it. Brother Ricky, I hope I answered that question. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, DJ, for
Okay.
the answer. And perhaps we have the last questions from Mahir here.
Okay.
Okay, so it's from Mahir in Jombang. To implement and immerse the encouragement of learners to learn the indigenous knowledge, should we put it into the curriculum, or is quite enough to have it as co-curriculum program? Suppose we have no support from the government yet.
Oh, okay. This is a problem, I guess, not only in Indonesia, it's also a problem here in the Philippines. A lot of the initiatives that we have on support for indigenous knowledge and indigenous education still don't have enough support from the government. And usually the approach is, if it becomes official by putting it in the curriculum, therefore indigenous knowledge becomes more powerful. Because if we just put it within just one course or one subject that learners learn in the curriculum, it may not have enough power. So again, the curriculum is a very powerful document. Why? Because if you're looking at curriculum studies and curriculum practice from the point of view of post-structuralism, the curriculum has the power to include or exclude knowledge. So the knowledge that the curriculum includes are the ones that gets to be popularized, that gets to be supported. And the knowledge that the curriculum does not include gets to be erased and gets to be forgotten. And I think that's the fundamental principle that we should remember every time that we think about the curriculum, and if every time that we think of the question of whether to include indigenous knowledge or not. Because if we just include indigenous knowledge like a supplement or a miscellaneous addition, we think of it as only as a secondary form of knowledge. But if we deliberately put it into our curriculum, it is saying that this curriculum also gives equal importance to indigenous knowledge. So when you are already at the process of reviewing your curriculum, you try to ask your colleagues, you try to ask your stakeholders, is indigenous knowledge something that we should clearly state in our curriculum, or is just something which is just an option? So again, it boils down to your institutional choices. I hope I answered your question, because it's also a very complex curricular and instructional issue as well, not only in Indonesia, but also in other universities around the world that offer teacher education programs. Uh, I think that's it. Brother Ricky, I hope I answered the question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the three participants who gave the questions, and thank you, DJ, for the great presentation and answers. So I think this is the end of the second session, and we would like to honor you a certificate of appreciation. So yeah, here. Okay, here it is. So we'll take picture in 3, 2, and 1. Thank you. Okay, and after this, we will have a group photo session with all the participants, perhaps.
Okay.
Don't forget to smile for sure. So, ready? So, and thank you very much, DJ, and we wish that we can see you again in the future in the next international webinar in another event. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you for still being us. So we will come to the last session, to the third session with Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak, PhD. Okay, I would like to introduce his CV. So, Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak from State University of Psycho. Okay, I'm so sorry. There's like technical issues here. Okay, so yeah, I would like to introduce the CV of the last, our third keynote speakers, Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak, PhD from the State University of Surabaya. From the State University of Medan. I would like to call Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak as perhaps my brother as well, Abang, since I was born in Medan. So yeah, we came from the same provinces, perhaps. Okay, so let's see his educational history, his educational background: Bachelor of Math Education from Universitas HKBP Nomensen. The second is Master of Mathematics Education from Universitas Negeri Surabaya. So, yeah, alumni of our beloved UNESA. And the last, PhD from Mathematics Education from Murdoch University. I think it's the same university with one of our lecturers, Boneni Mariana. So we can see there are some publications here from 2017 until 2021, and then there are some book work here. Yeah, there's contact info of Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak from State University of Medan, Universitas Negeri Medan. So without waiting for any longer, I would like to give the time to my brother, my abang, Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak. So time is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for calling me abang. That make us closer. Okay. Good morning, I think. Good morning, everyone. So I am very happy to be invited in this event, especially to listen to the first two keynote speakers, because they present a very interesting, very important idea. Let me share my screen. Okay, so
so sorry to interrupt, Abang. Perhaps we cannot hear the voice clearly. It's a bit low. It's not too loud enough. So some participants perhaps cannot hear it clearly.
Okay, I'll try to set the volume first. Is it clearer now?
Yes, it's very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. If the first two keynote speaker present their experience, their professional experience in the indigenous community, at this moment, I want to share with you my own reflective story related to the indigenous knowledge as being myself, but at least community member. So my presentation, I choose this title from my presentation, Reflecting on Indigenous Perspective Potential for Transforming Education. Bang Ricky has introduced me before, so if any of you haven't heard about Medan yet, it's located in North Sumatra, close to Lake Toba, the biggest volcanic lake in the world. Okay, so I don't need to talk more about myself, I think. Let's start with this one. The first story that I want to share, it's about an experience of my friend. Actually, he was a doctoral student. And one time, his supervisor asked them to visit his farmer community and to introduce, to share their work to those community. But at that moment, one of the community member, his farmer, asked this student group. This is the question. Okay, maybe not the exact question, but the content of the question is there. If I use your method, how much can I harvest? This is the basic question, I think, for this farmer, because they want to calculate their capital and their gain after some time. And my friend answered that it's about 1 ton, say something like that. The amount is not the important point, but the comparison between what the doctoral student may offer with their method compared to what the fish farmer has had before. So listening to this answer, the fish farmer that asked the question said, it's not good. With my current method, I can have 1.7 ton. So this is a simple situation for me that raise the existence of indigenous knowledge that is not less important compared to what we have in our education so far, even if it is in higher education level. When I am trying to formulate this presentation, I found this cartoon. Okay, so it's quite interesting for me. Yeah, it's about, yeah, I think Brother DJ have talked about colonialization in Philippines. We have also that period of time in Indonesia. So some Western country colonized some Asian countries in the past, and while doing so, they also offer knowledge or civilization based on their perspective. Yeah, but in this cartoon, kind of a critique with this word called civilization. Yes, here the white people, I'm sorry if I use that term, okay, the white people said that I'm here to bring you to bring you the civilization. you can stop being natives and become customers. I'm not saying that this is 100% the idea of introducing knowledge to the natives, but there is something like this hidden in the process of introducing this kind of civilization. But my question is not whether they are having a hidden curriculum or not, but my question is, does new perspective mean the end of a previous one? This is the important thing that I need to reflect for myself. Does the new perspective mean the end of the previous one? If we learn Western knowledge, do we need to leave? Do we need to abandon our indigenous knowledge? Or is there any other way? Okay. While doing that, I remember Mbak Neni, Bu Neni, talk about transformation and use the butterfly as a metaphor. Remember that story? This idea came to my mind. Okay. It is true that a butterfly is different from a caterpillar. So butterfly is not caterpillar anymore. It transformed from caterpillar into a butterfly. However, all that a butterfly has come from whatever the caterpillar was. Okay, so even if we learn many good things from a Western educational system, we are not Western people. I'm not a Western people. I'm still a Bataknese people. I'm still an Indonesian. Even I don't know which one is West, which one is East, because the world is round. Okay, it's, I think, just a terminology that is used. So I can't abandon my identity as Bataknese, even if I learn more in a Western educational system. Okay, so one of our Professor Sujadi, may he rest in peace, he has a big influence in my development as a professional and also as an individual, because I learned many important things, many values from him during my study in UNESA. So he said to us in our class, a new perspective doesn't necessarily replace a previous one. This is the first one that I always remember and always share with my student. Okay, the second one, there is no best medicine that can cure all illness. Okay, even if we have a headache, some people have headache, those people may have different medicine that effectively cure that problem. Okay, so there is no best medicine that can cure all illness. So all illness, it's impossible for one medicine to cure all illness. So we need to consider the specific situation to have a specific solution for that. And also, analogically can be applied to indigenous knowledge. Okay, as I said before, even if we learn many things, many good things from Western educational system, we still need to hold our original identity. Okay, there are many different perspectives or many paradigms that shape practices in education. Maybe you have been aware about this terminology, about different paradigm, such as positivism, post-positivism, and so on. So in positivism, the only knowledge that can be accepted is that knowledge that has been proved scientifically. And in this view, they believe that we can reach the true knowledge, still bring the idea from positivism, but they said that it is impossible to achieve a 100% true knowledge. What we can do is approach this true knowledge, as we may aware that there are development in the knowledge that we have. Okay, in science, some concept may be changed in different time because of the development in knowledge and technology. While in interpretivism, the knowledge is built based on our interpretation, on our experience. Okay, so when we reflect on our experience, constructing meaning on that, at the time we construct our knowledge, and so on. So these all different paradigms brings different perspective, different views that influence the practice on education. Okay. So if post-positivism comes after positivism, should we leave positivism? The same question can be applied here. If criticalism comes after the other three, positivism, post-positivism, and interpretivism, should we leave those all? Or can we integrate them to have a more comprehensive view on knowledge? This is the idea that is brought by integralism view. Okay, influenced by this view, that's why I am very impressed by the teaching of our professor that mentioned the new idea, the new view doesn't necessarily to change the old one. But the problem now, what about our indigenous knowledge? Because what we talked before are not our indigenous knowledge. They are also come from Western system. So here I want to share with you my own experience. Once, because there was a movie which this title. Once upon a time in RME group, RME here is a realistic mathematics education group. So previously I have an experience working with those people in this group, okay, preparing a textbook in RME style and discussing many things in implementation the idea. So at that time, I met a lady from Netherlands, a Dutch lady. She was a psychologist. Okay, so that was our first meeting. So we have no discussion before, no contact. That was our first meeting. At that time, she offered us a problem, a realistic problem that need to be solved. Okay, as an example for our work. And when I tried to solve this problem, I draw a picture on a paper, and try to input more information on that picture. But suddenly, she stopped me and asked this question. Wait a minute, you must be a botanist. As I mentioned before, this was our first meeting. So I was surprised. How can she tell that I am a botanist? So I asked her, why did you say so? This was my question. And she replied, I have collaborated with many people here. And as far as I am aware, only botanists think this way. What do you have in mind if you have this kind of response? So for me, it is a sign. It is a sign that there is something in botanist group. Okay? There is something in botanist group. If all botanist people think this way, if all botanist people think this way, so there must be something in the community that allow them to be able to develop that kind of thinking. Okay, so I was wondering what kind of cultural experience or what kind of life experience does botanist people have that allow them to develop this kind of logical thinking, that allow that nice lady to find out that I'm a botanist. Okay, so there must be something in our community, in our life experience, because this thing should not be achieved externally. I mean, out of the community, should be inside the community. For all botanist people to have that kind of thinking. So I try to reflect on this aspect. Okay, so it reminded me in one of our cultural products, which is upasa. Upasa is botanist rhymes. Okay, but there is something important. There is something unique in these rhymes that we will discuss later. Okay, this is one of the umpasa that we have. Okay, let me read it in our traditional language, Bataknese language. Napuran tano-tano ninna rangging marsiranggoman. Tumpe badatta padaudau to dita setotong marsigomgoman. If I can translate it freely into English, the betel plant, yeah, I'm not sure if you know this plant, but in Indonesian we call it sirih. Napuran is sirih in Indonesian. So this is the picture of sirih, the betel plant. Grows intertwined because it's a climbing plant, so it's intertwined while it grows. So this is the first part. Napuran tano-tano ninna rangging marsiranggoman. So the betel plant grows intertwined. And the second part, tumpe badatta padaudau todita setotong marsigomgoman. And if I translate it into English, even if we are separated by distance physically, our souls are still closely related. Okay, so if we see the rhyme tano-tano and padaudau, and the end of the line there, marsiranggoman with marsigomgoman, we can see the rhyme. But the rhyme is not the most important thing, because it is not merely about rhymes. Okay? Napuran tano-tano ninna rangging marsiranggoman is a fact from nature. That beetle plants grows intertwined is the nature of the beetle plant. That's a fact. Okay? So the fact here is used as a metaphor. By saying metaphor, it means that we are activating two different domains at the same time. Okay, so our soul are closely interconnected, like the beetle that grows intertwined. Okay, so we use in our traditional culture this fact from the nature. So it's not only about the rhymes, but there is something in the first line that has an analog, a similar meaning to the second line, which is the main message of the rhyme. Okay, so this is how Bataknis people think. If they use this kind of rhymes in daily lives, okay, so they need to think this way in their lives. So the necessary condition here is that we need to be aware of our nature, to be able to create that kind of rhymes. We need to reflect on the nature, and we need to make meaning of it. And at the same time, we need to do the same thing with human relations. So we may construct a metaphor between these two domains. Okay? So if this is the life of that community, they live in that kind of experience, then it is possible to develop that kind of way. So I mean, this is one example of the cultural life, cultural experience of Bataknis people. So apart from this, should be many other examples that can be explored. Okay, so my next question is, what if I brought this experience into my classroom? So what if I bring similar experience, I allowed my students to experience the similar situation, the similar way of thinking? And the next question that comes after that one is, what kind of experience should I offer to my students to allow them to develop that kind of logical thinking that is unique to Bataknis people, according to the Dutch lady? Okay, I use here the term, what kind of experience should I offer? Here, it reminds me to Schubert's idea of the images of curriculum. So here it is related to curriculum as life experience, not only a content. Okay, the previous keynote speakers talked a bit about this. So it's not mainly about the content, but we need to include the culture, the idea, the indigenous idea into the curriculum. So here I propose the life experience that is lived by the community is extracted and abstracted to be able to be brought in the classroom situation. Okay? There are many ways to do that, and here I put an example. This is one of the pictures that I like to take. pictures. And not only taking pictures, I also like to reflect on the pictures that I take. Okay, so here my reflection is sometimes limitations are there for safety. If we read on the picture, there is a sign, take care, steep slippery slope. Okay, so they provide this maybe as a barrier or also as a guide help for people to hold on something while work on this slope. Okay, so sometimes limitations are there for safety. So this picture reminds me on this thing. So when safety is not a problem, will limitation find another meaning? This is what I thought when I look at this picture. So what if we combine this kind of task, maybe art task or something similar with that? So we can combine this kind of task with reflective thinking. Say, take a picture from your environment, okay, and then put some reflection on it. If they have this kind of habit, so the student should become a reflective person. Okay, reflecting on their experience become a habit, become the part of their life. So in line with the interpretivism view, it is possible for them to develop knowledge after reflecting on those experiences. Okay, this is another example. One of our professor in Universitas Negeri Medan, also alumni from UNESA, Universitas Negeri Surabaya, in doctoral, should be master degree and doctoral degree. Okay, so the product of his doctoral research is this innovation in learning model. So he developed a problem-based curriculum that based on Bataknese culture. Okay, so here he abstracted the way of Bataknese people live. Okay, how they interacted socially. Okay, and bring that abstraction into the classroom interaction activity. And a part of that, he also bring the values from the culture into the classroom. So in this way, he brings the indigenous knowledge, he integrated it into the classroom experience. Okay, so here I am I'm raising two examples. One is by providing an experience through a task, maybe, or something else, or by developing an approach, instructional approach, based on the indigenous knowledge, the culture that we have. So how can we do that? It is possible to do that idea if we ourselves transform ourselves. So there are maybe many experts that propose their idea, but here I am raising my supervisor, Peter Tyler, idea about transformation way. So it is transformation through 5 ways of knowing. These are the ways of knowing proposed by him. The first one is cultural self-knowing, or similar to self-realization. So here, I need to understand my background of culture and beliefs, my indigenous perspective that have influenced my values, my ideals, my emotionality and spirituality, which are reflected in my attitude, in my choices, and in my practices. Okay? I need to be clear on that idea. If I don't, it will be hard for me to introduce it, to integrate it into the my educational practice. Okay. The second one is relational knowing. After I understand myself, it's time to start to understand the other. Okay. Actually, for me myself, experiencing the existence of the others before me is also a time, a moment to experience myself. Because while I understand the other, I may see how I am different and at the same time similar to that others. Okay, so the attempts to relate to the other allow me to be open to difference. So while realizing my uniqueness will make me at once different from and similar to the others. It is true that the uniqueness will make me feel special. However, just like myself, everybody else grows to be a unique person as well, which then turns everybody into a special person. So how am I related to each of these special person? How can I being open to the difference? That's the second ways of knowing. The third one is critical knowing. Okay. So after I understand myself, I understand the others and my relation with the others, I start to understand how the culture, the beliefs, and the ideology govern my way of life and the way we relate to each other in our society and to nature. Okay. How this culture, this belief, this ideology influence my attitude, my practices, my way of thinking. So by thinking critically on that aspect, okay, being aware of my background and its influence on my views, I learn more and refine my knowledge about my society and also about myself. Okay. By trying to look back at my background and draw a connection between it and the way I am right now. That's what we have in this third way of knowing, critical knowing. So it's not just aware of my cultural background, my indigenous knowledge, but also critically learn more, deeper about it, how it influenced myself. Okay, the fourth way of thinking is visionary and ethical knowing. So this fourth way of knowing will unfold when I start creating my vision of a better world. After I know myself, I know the others and my relation to the others, and critically understand how my knowledge, my background influence me, then I have a vision. How can I create a better world? In this case, how can I create a better educational system, an educational practice that involve this indigenous idea? Okay, how can I use my indigenous perspective to provide a better education? This is the fourth one. And the last one, knowing in action. So here we are trying to make difference. How can I put my ideas into actions? So that vision of mine about the better world, the better practice, how can I put it into action? Okay, now here I'm thinking about what I can do within my capacity to make a difference in order to help the world become a better place, in order to make a transformation in educational practice, using that indigenous knowledge that I have. Okay, so I think I am not going to talk more. That's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your attention and for the time you provide for me. And apology for any mistake that through my words or my attitude before. Thank you very much. Bang Ricky. Yeah, back to you, Bang Ricky.
Okay, thank you very much, Abang. And I would like to say thank you to you in Batanis, Mauliate.
Mauliate.
Is how we say thank you in Batanis. And I'm so sorry I forget to say Horace to you in.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Actually, Horace is two words, Ho and Ras. Ho it means you, Ras means full, so, or blessed. So blessed you.
Bless you. Okay, bless you, Mr. Mangaratu. Okay, so thank you very much for your great presentation. For sure, we learned a lot from your presentation today. And now we go to the Q&A session. And yeah, thank you very much, Puika, for sharing the screens. First, we have from Ilham, from Umram. Okay, so why is it so difficult for the president and representatives to pass the Indigenous Peoples Bill, which seeks to preserve Indigenous people's knowledge and rights? Okay, thank you.
It's hard for me to answer this one because I'm not the president and I also not the representative. So, but maybe because they don't come to UNESA yet. They haven't come to UNESA yet to have this kind of idea. So it's kind of political issue. And with political issue, I think there are many interests involved. So there are many considerations that I can't represent them to discuss more about it. So maybe first we can pray, if you like to pray, and then yeah, maybe we can introduce this idea more, so more people will be aware about it, and hopefully it will bring a wave that move them to the way that we think. I think that's what I can say about that issue. Thank you, Mariki.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Mangaratu. And yes, hopefully it answers the questions from Ilham. And here we have the second questions, perhaps. Yeah, it's from Amanda from Surabaya. So what are the challenges of culture-based learning in Indonesia? between now Indonesia is a multicultural country. So how do we teach other regional cultures in a specific location?
Wait a minute, I need to answer someone here. I'm sorry. Okay, this is interesting. It's a 1 million question, I think. Especially in our context as a multicultural country. I thought about this in my doctoral study, because in my research was about integrating ethics into mathematics education. So at that time, I was thinking about which ethical value should I offer. Should I offer Bataknese ethical value? Should I offer a particular view of ethics, such as Kantian ethics, or other views such like that, or my religious view? Because when I choose one of those, I may propose something that is not in line with others' view. Okay, so this is an important thing, especially for us in Indonesia. But if you remember, the second way of knowing that we discussed before, after I understand myself, then how I relate to the others. This is an important stage for us to raise this kind of issue from this question. Okay, how am I different to other, and how am I similar to other? Okay, that's why the second way of knowing is important in the process of transformation. So when we respect the difference, when we open to the difference, okay, we may enrich our idea, we may enrich our practice, individually and professionally. But when we reject that differences, in my research, I called it exclusive and inclusive way. Okay? When we exclude the differences, we may stay in our comfort zone, in the community that's similar to us, but that's it. Okay, we closed ourselves to an opportunity to develop more. But when we open ourselves, include those differences in an inclusive way, as I mentioned before, while experience the difference, we may sharpen our knowledge about ourselves. When we meet the other, we experience the other, we experience ourselves as well. So the difference is there for us to understand more about ourselves. Okay, so if we think this way, I think differences is not a problem anymore. But before that, we need the first way of knowing. We need to understand ourselves first. Okay, because without that, we may lose our own identity. Okay, that's what happened in our educational system that is discussed so far, also with the previous keynote speakers. When we involve ourselves in the what we call Western educational system, we abandon our indigenous knowledge, okay, our original identity, okay. So we become another identity. Okay, so I think that's the main point for that, to understand ourselves and how we are related to others, and continue with the other ways of knowing, the critical one, the vision, and the action. Okay, so I hope that answered that question, Bang Ricky.
Okay, thank you very much, Bang Mangaratu. So yes, I do agree. There are two key terms, two key points here: understanding your own self, and for sure, the second is respect is very important. So yeah, and perhaps we have the last questions here in the third session. Is from Muhammad Mahir. Well, how to react to the lack of trust of learners or parents in elementary schools by the new method, in this case, indigenous knowledge based on the local wisdom from another part of the city. For example, like Batanese brought to Javanese. Okay, since I think Mr. Mangaratu Abang is a Batanese, but ever study in UNESA, and yeah, you have that kind of experience for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, okay. Thank you, Pak Muhammad Mahir, for this question. Okay. This is another important question. Okay, the lack of trust of learners or parents. First, we need to remember that we are not abandoning one idea over the other. Okay, we are trying to integrate the indigenous perspective into the educational system that we have currently. Okay, so we are not offering the indigenous purely, while leave the system that we have now. The most important one for me is that by integrating this indigenous knowledge, we are put the students closer to the community life. We put the students closer into the life beyond the school. Currently, I think, if not all, most of our educational practice, okay, the experience in the school is not related to the life or the students. Okay, so the educational that we offer in school is necessary for the interest of the school itself. How to pass the examination, how to fulfill the task from the teacher. So we are not teaching, we are not educating our students for the life beyond the school. We are teaching them for the interest of the school. So by integrating this indigenous knowledge, we are putting them in their own community. Okay, they experience their own cultural life. Okay, if the parents understand this, I think the problem is not there anymore, because we help them to be themselves, not to put them away from their life. That's my perspective. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Bang Ricky.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bang Mangaratu. So yeah, I think that close up our last session, our third session for today international webinar with the theme of transforming education through indigenous knowledge. Once again, I would like to say thank you to Abang, and I would like to say it one more time in Batanese. So mauliate, Abang.
Mauliate, Horas.
Okay, so now we would like to honor a certificate of appreciation to Abang and how the host ready? Okay, so thank you very much for being the keynote speakers in our international webinar, and we will take the picture in 3, 2, and 1. Thank you very much. Done? Okay. Oh, sorry, they are not ready yet. Okay, already? Okay, one more time, please. So in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, thank you. And to close this, before I give to MC for the closing statement, we would like to have a group photo session with Abang, with our keynote speaker, Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak, PhD. So we'll take the photo group session in 3, 2, and smile, and 1. Okay, thank you. And before I give it back to our beautiful MC here, so I would like to tell off all of the participants that in the chat box, there are 2 links later. First is the link for the presents for today. So you need to fill it for sure, and you will get e-certificate. And there, the second link, it is from our second keynote speaker, Mr. Dhoni Panisales. It's an evaluation form, and we also would like you to fill it later. Okay, we will share both links in the chat box. And yeah, that's all for today. Thank you very much to all participants for attending, and yeah, stay patiently to join our international webinars. And once again, I would like to thank all the 3 great keynote speakers. Thank you very much, Nell Taylor. Thank you very much, DJ, and thank you very much, Mr. Mangaratu Simanjuntak. Okay, so thank you. I will give this back to the MC. So Zeni, time is yours. Thank you, and see you again in the next international webinar. Bye-bye. Saya udah menghilang ya, jangan. Ya, ngomong aja.
Well, thank you very much for Mr. Ricky. We know that we have not just one, but there are 3 amazing speakers that delivering such informative and insightful presentation and discussion. Also, once again, I would like to say thank you very much to our 3 outstanding speakers, and also our amazing moderator, Mr. Ricky Setiawan. Well, honorable distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, apparently this is the end of our international webinar, and those are the agendas that we have presented to you. So let's come up to the last agenda. We are going to have a closing ceremony. Well, honorable distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for participating in our event today, and hopefully all of us can learn something from it and got inspiration from it. So, because education needs inspiration and not just information, only inspired human beings can transform their own lives and lives around them. So, now we would like to remind all of you guys to please fill out the attendance and the evaluation form in the chat feature, so that way you can get your A certificate as soon as we finish this event. And if there are any problems, you can contact us through the number listed on the chat feature. Also, if you are looking for another event of us, you can check our official Instagram account in at HMGPGSD_UNESA and our YouTube channel PGSD UNESA. And also, we will share the material in website which is the link is dropped in chat feature. So on behalf of the commits, I would like to say thanks, and also we hope we will see you soon in another event. Enjoy your rest of the day. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
A campus from the best city in Indonesia, a city with a long history of struggle and heroism. Welcome to Universitas Negeri Surabaya, a university with superior accreditation. Founded in 1964 as a teaching institute for education under the name IKIP Surabaya, to be an educational institution that carries the mandate as university that produces educators. Currently, UNESA, established as a center for education development, preservation of traditional arts, sports science, and inclusive services for people with disabilities. Growing to be a leading university, UNESA now manages 7 faculties consisting of 64 undergraduate study programs, 10 vocational programs, and 31 postgraduate study programs. The main campus is located in Lidawetan, Surabaya, with 7 main buildings.
rasa, ilmu, iman, takwa. Demi satu kata, oleh satu Indonesia. Yakin kita pasti akan bisa meraih asa, menggapai cita. Sing-singkan lengan, pandanglah ke depan, kobarkan semangat dalam dada. Terus berkarya selagi bisa, bangun yang lelah dan putus asa. Bergandeng tangan, satukan upaya, Unesa satu langkah di depan. Jayalah Unesa, satu langkah di depan. Unesa, satu langkah di depan.
Zoom akan berakhir. 3, 2, 1. Terima kasih.
Fill it later. Okay, we will share both links in the chat room, chat box. And yeah, that's all for today. Thank you very much to all participants for attending, and yeah, stay